Yes, okay, so let's begin with a film that definitely meets the qualifiers of masculinity in that other than a child, there are no women.
Yes.
So it definitely fits the bill that way.
Yes.
But is it more masculine? It's got The Hitchhiker.
Yes, we're starting things off in 1953 with, as mentioned, Ida Lupino's The Hitchhiker, which is about, and this will shock you, a hitchhiker. William Tellman's Emmett Myers is rampaging his way across the southwest of North America, murdering and stealing from those unfortunate enough to stop and pick him up. His latest victims are two American fishermen who travel down to Baja California for a holiday that's about to go very sour. Edmund O'Brien's Roy Collins and Frank Lovejoy's Gilbert Bowen soon find themselves on the wrong end of Myers' revolver, forced to drive him back to the USA while staying one step ahead of the law, which has started a manhunt on both sides of the border. Narratively, I don't think there's all that much else to tell you about The Hitchhiker. It sets up its premise quickly and efficiently and gets on with showing the effects of this stressful situation on Collins and Bowen, who understandably grow increasingly frayed over the course of the piece, with the ever-present threat of imminent death from the unstable Myers looming over them. Just as well as sufficient, 70 minutes is not a great deal of time to do anything with, let alone show the effects of the psychological nightmare, which, while also interspersing enough of the, to be honest, perfunctory look at the police chase to give a bit of time pressure to proceedings. But it works pretty well, with O'Brien and Lovejoy getting quite increasingly rattled as the tension increases. I'm not quite so convinced by William Tallman's turn, although that's perhaps more due to lack of material to do much with. I don't need or want any further character motivation or development from him, but he's still played a little bit too close to a mustache-twirling villain for a movie that's otherwise doing a pretty good job of having believable actions and reactions. Still, that said, it's a taut crime drama that doesn't outstay its welcome, and while it's not life-changing cinema, it's an enjoyable 70 minutes that's worth catching up with. Have you not seen it already? What'd you make of it then?
I quite enjoyed it. I did appreciate that it was only 70 minutes, actually. It was really efficient.
Yeah.
Although, in something you only hear from us very, very rarely, it perhaps could have stood maybe another 10 minutes just to increase the tension in a few scenes.
Yes, exactly. Spoilers, this is probably the first podcast in 3 years where we're not going to say this film was too long. None of them are particularly long.
For any of them.
Yeah.
Our longest film's 2 hours, and that's... the rest are all about 90 minutes or thereabouts.
Or under, yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I do agree to a degree with your points about William Tallman. I don't think he's that great a villain. I've seen worse, and he's reasonably effective. And his makeup, that's a convincing fake eye.
Yeah, yeah.
Even in high definition.
Yes.
A fake eyelid. But I don't know, I didn't find him particularly threatening. He felt like he should have been more in a Western or something, so maybe going back to your point about him being moustache twirling.
Yeah.
Because I was watching this and I'm thinking, I don't know if perhaps it's the time or not, but I just wanted him to have that kind of edge, like a very different character, of course, but the kind of unpredictability of, say, Forrest Whitaker's Idi Amin in The Last King of Scotland.
Yeah, yeah.
That you're always kind of dancing around the guy because you feel like it could always just go off at any minute.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get that kind of vibe from him. He's clearly a threat, but I didn't find him particularly frightening. But the film has its moments, and when, like, for instance, the scene when they're at the well in the middle of the desert, and you're thinking, something happens there. Nobody's ever going to know.
Yeah.
Probably nobody's been at that well for 20 years. And so there were bits that actually just to do with the setting and the locations they're in. I think they're actually a great deal more threat a lot of the time than Emmett Myers himself.
Yeah.
Because all it needs is for something to go wrong and they die. And because they're going to the middle of the desert with damaged cars and stuff. So there's definitely threat comes from that. But the actual villain himself, not great. Not bad, but not great.
Yeah, and there's definitely a couple of scenes like that one at the well you mentioned. There's a few others that's more of a... Basically, it's where Gilbert and Roy are trying to debate whether they should be taking on this guy, whether they can get the drop on him, and these kind of things, which I guess is why it's showed up in this list, because it is... There do seem to be moments where they're kind of... One of them is geeing the other one up to kind of man up almost and take the other guy on, despite it being not a particularly great idea to do it. And maybe that's partly why it's on there, the kind of machismo of, having to submit yourself to someone else's threats. And those scenes work really well. There's only 2 or 3 of them, maybe, in it. It could have done with more of that, I think, and perhaps a bit better spaced out to really kind of drive it home. A lot of the things where it's a lot of the scenes where they're going through the police's efforts to kind of track him down and trick him, and by giving fake radio broadcasts and things like that, are kind of a bit shoddy. They're kind of perfunctory, I think, at best. They're not particularly well handled, and some of the actors using them are not the best either. Whereas Edmund O'Brien and Frank Lovejoy, I think, do really well. They're really quite convincing as the kind of characters as they kind of devolve as things go along and get increasingly more frayed. That part of it works very well and is almost contemporary in how it would treat that. I think that's aged very well. A lot of the things around it perhaps haven't, which is really the only sort of slight knock against it. But yeah, I think overall for a film that's knocking on for 70 years old at this point is doing pretty well. Yeah.
And as to the police, I quite like that they're at least competent.
Yes.
Which is better, especially given how Mexicans tend to be viewed in the United States in the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
So I guess that's good. My usual kind of nitpicking is wondering why there was a Mexico City police car in the middle of Baja California, but maybe that's just what they could get their hands on. But, it's... So yeah, I appreciate like the competence of the police there, but there are, and I suppose modern films are not immune to it, but there are certain kind of tropes in there which kind of really stuck out to me, like the one, like he's trying to follow the pursuit on the radio, and like, oh, it's very, very convenient, isn't it, that the bit of the news he needs to listen to is on the radio right when he turns on it, turns it on. It's like, oh, that's handy.
Yes.
I don't mean this film's by no means unique in that regard at all. I say certainly modern films can do that same sort of thing too, but it seems so convenient, and it kind of, that kind of thing does take me out of a film a bit.
Yeah.
The other thing is, like, film noirs generally, well, not at least often, quite a claustrophobic setting. Whereas this is set in the middle of a desert, which is so open. I think that's quite successful, actually, because you get the claustrophobic feeling of the 3 of them in the car together. But then at the same time, there's this absolute isolation caused by the desert, which is like there's an exterior threat and an interior threat.
Yeah.
Which I quite liked about it. But yeah, it's an efficient wee film. It's not quite as good as I was hoping for, unfortunately. I'd kind of built my expectations of this quite a bit for various reasons. But it's still pretty solid. And I guess to keep with the theme of our episode, the masculinity more is that you can't give in, and you have to, I guess if it was British, you would say stiff upper lip. Yeah. That sort of thing. And that these are former soldiers and like they're buddies from the war and they're trying to protect each other and that sort of thing. Yes, but it's not the best start to this list. It was meant to be about masculinity when the first film's not. It's a masculine film, but it's not that much about masculinity.
Yeah.
Yes. Just to give things away, Scott already did earlier, but we thought this list was a really interesting idea, but it's not a particularly good list in terms of what it claimed to be about.
Yes. Spoilers, I don't think there's any film on here I didn't like, and so it's a list of films I will be recommending, but not necessarily for the reasons they were recommended to us.